Most gardeners say they want living soil, then they sterilize it with neglect. They leave beds dry between crops, dump raw scraps straight into planting rows, or rely on bottled nutrients while the biological engine underneath slowly starves. Then they wonder why worm populations crash and compost seems to, well, disappear without improving structure. The real consequence is simple. Without fast, consistent microbial food, worms don't multiply, and without worms, nutrient cycling slows down hard. If you care about real results in raised beds, backyard plots, or even hybrid hydro systems, subscribe now, because this channel is about practical soil biology that actually moves the needle. Today I'm going to show you the rice method I've tested across multiple growing systems that reliably spikes microbial activity and triggers noticeable worm concentration within weeks. The reason plain rice works better than most people expect comes down to carbon structure and microbial response. Cooked white rice is almost pure starch. Starch is an easily accessible carbon source for bacteria. When you introduce small, controlled amounts into moist soil, microbial populations respond immediately. Bacteria bloom first, fungi follow, and worms move toward that microbial hotspot because they're not eating the rice directly. They're feeding on the explosion of microbes breaking it down. I started experimenting with this in a 4x8 raised bed that had decent organic matter, but low visible worm activity. Instead of adding more compost on top, I buried half-cup portions of cooked cooled rice about 8 inches deep, spaced roughly every 2 feet down the center of the bed. I covered each pocket firmly and watered lightly. Within 10 days, when I carefully checked one section, worm density had at least tripled in those zones compared to the control side of the bed. But there's a right way to do this, and a wrong way that creates sour, anaerobic messes. You cannot dump a bowl of hot rice into a hole and expect good results. Heat and excess volume create anaerobic pockets. What works best is cooled rice that's slightly dried so it's not clumped into a paste. For a standard backyard raised bed, I use about 2 cups of cooked rice per 32 square feet, every 3 to 4 weeks during active growing season. That's it. More is not better. Depth matters more than people think when they try this for the first time. In warm climates where surface soil temperatures can push above 85 degrees Fahrenheit, I bury rice pockets closer to 8 or even 10 inches deep. That keeps decomposition in a stable temperature range and prevents surface pests from detecting it. In cooler spring soil, 6 inches is enough. The goal is to position the rice where moisture is consistent and oxygen is still available. In heavier clay soils, I mix the rice 50-50 with crumbly finished compost before burying it. That prevents compaction around the starch mass and improves airflow. In sandy soils, I sometimes add a handful of leaf mold to slow decomposition slightly and retain moisture around the pocket. This method is not a fertilizer replacement, and that's where a lot of online advice goes sideways. Rice is primarily carbon with minimal nitrogen. If your soil is already nitrogen poor, burying rice alone can temporarily tie up nitrogen as microbes multiply. I've seen pale leaves appear in beds where gardeners added too much carbon without balancing it. The fix is simple. Pair rice with mature compost or apply it in beds that already receive steady organic inputs. In my tomato beds, which are heavily amended in early season, rice pockets accelerate biology without creating nutrient drag. Moisture control decides whether this trick becomes powerful or problematic. Worms operate best when soil moisture sits around that sweet spot where a squeezed handful holds shape but doesn't drip. After burying rice pockets, I irrigate enough to settle soil but not saturate it. Overwatering creates oxygen depletion and slows worm movement. Underwatering prevents microbial bloom. In drip-irrigated beds, I place rice pockets near emitters but not directly under them, so moisture stays steady without flushing the area. I've tested this in open ground rows growing squash and brassicas, and the difference in soil texture after one full season is noticeable. Areas where rice-feeding pockets were maintained every month developed deeper aggregation and more visible worm channels. When I pulled mature kale plants, roots were thicker and surrounded by granular castings instead of compact clods. Now let's talk about using this in systems that aren't traditional soil beds. In greenhouse setups where I run hydroponic channels but maintain perimeter soil beds for companion planting, rice pockets help maintain worm populations year-round. Greenhouses can dry soil faster than outdoor beds, so I bury slightly deeper and sometimes cover the area with a thin layer of leaf mulch to stabilize moisture. For large container systems, like 20 to 30 gallon grow bags filled with compost blends, I reduce the amount drastically. A quarter cup of cooked rice per container, buried 6 inches deep near the outer edge, is plenty. In containers, overdoing carbon inputs causes imbalance faster than in-ground beds. Now, here's where monitoring becomes important if you're serious about soil life. When you're feeding biology intentionally, compost quality and temperature matter. If you're pairing rice with compost that hasn't finished breaking down, you risk creating overheating zones underground. I monitor my main compost piles with a long stem thermometer so I know exactly when material has cooled into the stable range before using it in beds. I use a 36-inch probe model from the RioTemp store because it reads the core temperature accurately instead of just the surface. If you're building larger piles, a deep thermometer changes how precisely you manage compost. The link to the one I use is in the description if you want to check it out. You don't need fancy tools to make rice work, but you do need restraint and consistency. One season, I intentionally pushed the limit in a test bed and buried nearly a gallon of rice across a small 4x4 area. Within a week, soil smelled slightly sour when disturbed. Worm activity dropped instead of rising. That experiment reinforced something I've seen repeatedly. Small, repeatable inputs beat heavy, occasional dumping every time. If you maintain modest rice pockets every 3 to 4 weeks through warm season, worm populations build gradually and stabilize. After about 2 months, you'll start seeing castings on the surface after irrigation or rain. After one full growing season, digging into those beds feels different. Soil fractures naturally instead of breaking in hard slabs. This method also integrates well with living mulch systems. If you're running clover or low-growing cover crops between rows, rice-feeding pockets supercharge microbial activity beneath that living canopy. The cover crop stabilizes moisture and temperature, while rice acts as a quick carbon pulse. Together, they create a layered biological system instead of relying on surface mulch alone. There are trade-offs, and serious gardeners should understand them. Rice can attract rodents if buried too shallow. It can create nitrogen drawdown if used excessively in poor soil. It is not a miracle input that replaces compost, crop rotation, or mineral balancing. But used correctly, it's one of the fastest ways I've found to stimulate microbial bloom and concentrate worm activity exactly where you want it. And worms are not the end goal. They are indicators. When worm populations increase, you're seeing oxygen levels, moisture balance, and microbial density align properly. That alignment translates into improved nutrient mineralization and stronger plant growth over time. In one side-by-side test with peppers, beds receiving monthly rice pockets produced slightly thicker stems and darker foliage by mid-season. Yield differences weren't dramatic overnight, but by final harvest weights, the rice-fed section consistently outperformed the control by a noticeable margin. That's what matters to me. Measurable improvement, not hype. If you decide to test this, start small. Pick one bed. Use 2 cups of cooked, cooled rice across a standard 4x8 space. Bury it 6 to 8 inches deep in 3 evenly spaced pockets. Maintain steady moisture. Observe worm concentration after 2 to 3 weeks. Adjust based on your soil type and climate. The more you treat soil like a living system, instead of an inert medium, the better your crops respond. If this kind of practical soil biology approach is useful to you, subscribe to the channel and share this video with another grower who wants better results without relying on gimmicks. Growing better food starts with understanding what's happening under the surface, and the more we refine these small, effective techniques, the stronger our gardens become season after season.